Welcome to the Nerdstalgic Podcast with your host, the Ginger Bookworm. Nerdstalgic with the Ginger Bookworm. Nerdstalgic with the Ginger Bookworm.
Howdy folks, and welcome back to another exciting episode of the Nerdstalgic Podcast with me, your host Luke. Hope you're all doing well, hope you're all good, as per usual. Now before I get into today's topic, as you all know, I've got to do the business first, and the business is good business, because business is good. Today's business, as always, is World of Books. For the long-time listeners and for new listeners, World of Books is a company that do fantastic things with recycled books. They rescue books from landfills, charity shops, that sort of things, and give them a new life and sell them for cheap online. And I love them, and I've gone to them for years, and so they have greatly, and I really appreciate them for this, for sponsoring not just the show but every episode up until the end of the year by giving me a promo code that you can use at checkout. So if you go to checkout with any books that you do that, or they do video games, they do vinyl as well. If you type in the code nerdy10, that's NERDY10, nerdy10 at checkout, all higher case, then you can get yourself 10% off your next shop. So thank you very much to World of Books for sponsoring the show. Now, today's topic is, it's taken me a while to get round to this one, but I wanted to let the dust settle, because as I will get into in a minute, there's a lot of hate that goes around with this movie, and to be honest, I can somewhat understand it. So I just thought, I'm going to let the dust settle. I'm going to let all bygones and just let everybody sort of, fight each other, and whatever's left on the battlefield, I will sort of pick the scraps. And that's what I'm doing. So today's topic is, I finally got around to watching Disney's Lightyear, not Buzz Lightyear, Lightyear on Disney Plus. But before I get into that, it's story time. Before I get into the review, I want to tell a bit of a story. So I have a great love for Toy Story. Toy Story first came out in 1995. I was born in 98. So I think when I was born, I think we had Toy Story 2. Toy Story 2 came out in 1999. So I was only about a year old when the second movie came out. But as for a lot of things that I've watched and a lot of things that I reviewed, I tend to sort of review cornerstone movies, because to me, movies that have a cornerstone or even some sort of emotional connection to are the most powerful. It doesn't matter if the movie's good or not. I feel like they're the most interesting, because even if, like I said, the film is crap, it still means something to you. And Toy Story, for all of us, I think, is one of them sort of things that we all commonly share, is our love for Toy Story, because we all had that idea when we were kids, when we were playing with our toys, that when we left them, that they were alive, that they would come to life and have lives. And I don't know about you guys, but I tried to do it many times myself. I'd leave my toys on their own, and I would run out my room, and I'd run down the stairs, make a bit of noise, and pretend that I'd ran downstairs when I hadn't. I was still at the top of the stairs, and I'd creep to my bedroom door, and I'd count to three, and I'd like a surprise attack, and I'd try to like push my door open and kind of catch them in the act, or just catch them falling over or something like that. Never did, never happened, but I kept trying. Even now as an adult, I'm 24, but I collect a lot of action figures and that sort of thing for like collectibles. And there are many times where like I would talk to them, or I would like move them and be like, "You stay there, don't move," and I'll come back, and I'd always check, but and that's because I'm just young at heart. I'm still quite sort of childish at heart, which you have to be nowadays. Like the world's too dark and dismal to be really sort of boring and really sad. You've got to be sort of cheery, and don't let anybody tell you different. Um, but yeah, I still try to catch them at the act. Still haven't yet. Still trying. But Toy Story for me means a lot. I love Toy Story 1, Toy Story 2. Toy Story 3 had me in tears. I was crying at Toy Story 3. I went to the cinema to go watch Toy Story 4 with a friend of mine. And again, that movie, I didn't think it would happen for a third time. Like, every Toy Story's made me cry, really. Let's be honest with ourselves. We're putting everything on the table. Every Toy Story's made me really, really bawl and cry. But I didn't think it would happen a fourth time. I thought, no, there was no need for a fourth movie. Then the fourth movie came out, went to cinemas to watch it. I was there tears in my eyes, crying. I was like, I don't want it to end. Please don't end. I don't want to I don't want a Toy Story 5. Toy Story 5 is not needed. I just, how it ended. I thought it ended perfectly in Toy Story 3, and then to end it even more perfectly, if that's even a word, in Toy Story 4 is just like, they managed to get they with Toy Story they managed to get lightning in a bottle countless times. No matter how you feel, every time they made a Toy Story, it always worked. And that's funny because I've mentioned this before. When Pixar decided to do what they were going to do, decided to do an animation studio, that they said they weren't going to do sequels, but they have done. And sometimes it's worked. Sometimes with Toy Story, it's worked. Then sometimes you get like a Cars 2, or you get a Planes. Even though Planes was like its own original thing, it was still part of Cars. Again, it didn't work. Planes 2 really, really didn't work. Um, in Monsters University and all that. So sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But with Toy Story, like, it was just lightning in the bottle. Every movie was perfect. Every movie on its own could stand alone as its own film, and that's just down to the amazing cast of toys, characters, and to the voice actors. So we all have a love for Toy Story. Toy Story is ingrained in our hearts and in our soul. And the reason I'm telling you this story, and the reason we all have this common shared love, because I'm sure it's not just me who has this love for Toy Story, because I had the toys and I had everything to do with Toy Story. Um, it's my next part. What I'm going to mention is the fact of this movie got a lot of hate. It got a lot of hate from fans, and I was one of them. I didn't, well, tell a lie, I wasn't in terms of hating it as like this is the worst thing ever, but I was more on the side of I don't like it because Tim Allen is not doing the voice for Buzz. Tim Allen is Buzz. It's plain and simple. He's always been Buzz. He is Buzz Lightyear, right? I get it. Chris Evans, Captain America. I love Chris Evans. He's a fantastic actor. I'm not taking that away from him, but he's not Buzz Lightyear. He's somebody trying to be Buzz Lightyear. And I've seen all the interviews and I've seen all the sort of the press things that he did, where a lot of people asked him that he was trying to basically, he didn't want to overshadow, well, no way he can, but he didn't want to basically take over from Tim Allen. He wanted to make it his own. But it's kind of hard, as he mentioned himself, to take on the role that's so well known, but for the one character, for the one voice actor, you know, um, and just to not, what's the word I'm looking for, for not to be him, So I get it on his fact, like he was just, doing. He had a contract, he got offered it, and I would take it if I was offered by Disney to do a Buzz Lightyear or Woody or something like show. I'd want to do it. I'd feel kind of bad, like, well, doesn't Tom Hanks or Tim Allen want to do it? But I guess if it's not live action, it's like if it was a live action, if they made a live action Buzz Lightyear movie, then in all fairness, yeah, have Chris Evans play, Buzz Lightyear because it's live action. Tim Allen is a bit old, he can't do it, and that's fine, you know. Um, but when it comes to voice work, Tim Allen's voice is still Tim Allen's voice. It still sounds the same as it did in 1995. It hasn't changed. You know what I mean? So they could have kept it, but there is a lot of hate to this movie. I've heard a lot of things with people saying, the first 30 or so minutes was good, the rest was a bit convoluted. And the reason I say this, and the reason I told my story of my personal story, Toy Story, and the reason why we all share that common love for Toy Story, is because we all, as like I said, we all share that love. Is the fact of when they were saying they're doing Buzz Lightyear and they were changing things, and it was a bit confusing. Like, it wasn't till the end of this movie being close to coming out is that they actually said to people, "Oh no, this is nothing to do with Pixar and the canon. This is just a movie that Andy watched in the cinema, and this is the reason why he likes Buzz Lightyear so much." Because for a long time I was sitting there thinking, "Hold on, what's this movie meant to be? Is it a sequel? Is it a prequel? Is it, how does it fit into the Pixar theory? How does it work? What is this movie meant to be? Other than it's just Buzz Lightyear." So I feel like, there was a lot of hate, and some of it was warranted, some of it was just a bit mean. But I just wanted to say before we started, kind of give you the groundwork. We all share this love, and I can understand where people were coming from, where they disliked it, and why had a lot of people a lot of issue with it. But as I do with every review, whether it be a movie that I've watched 1,000 times, or it's a movie I've watched for the first time, if it's got love or hate for it, I always try to go in with a clear mind, and I want to give my first initial sort of my true opinion. as best as possible, because that's what you listen for. You listen for me to give my 100% opinion, not, oh, I liked it, but some guys on the line said it was horrible, so I'm going to lower it. I'm not like that. I'm going to give it the fair dues of what I feel like is fair and my views and opinions. So, with that being said, that's the introduction. That's sort of giving you an understanding of where I stand on Toy Story and the whole sort of hate it's got. It got a lot of hate, a lot more than I've mentioned. I only want to mention a few things because we'll be here all day. The hate that this movie got could be probably made into its own episode, but I don't want to do that. We've already spent 10 minutes on the introduction. I want to move straight on to the review, because that's the most important part. That's why you're here. So without further ado, let's get into it, shall we? Right, so the review. So, first off, I'm going to start with the characters. I know I'm not going to start with the story, but I'm going to start with the characters. The characters are great. All the characters are quite interesting, I would say. I understand where people are coming from now, with the first 30 minutes are the most hard hitting. I'll admit, I didn't cry in this movie. There were moments where I could tell like this is the moment that's meant to build up to have tears. I didn't cry, and I'll get on to why in a minute, but the first 30 minutes is incredible of this film. I would even go as far as the first 45. For me personally, the first about 40 to 45 minutes for me would be good, because I checked it, because I kept looking to see when the 30-minute mark was coming, to kind of see where people's kind of opinions, because that's what a lot of people were saying online. So I wanted to kind of see if people were wrong, that sort of thing, in my own sort of opinions. For me, it was around about the 40 to 45, almost an hour mark, where it started to lose me. But the characters were interesting, especially the Horned Fawn, where you first meet the Buzz Lightyear, and he has his companion, which is Hawthorne. When you meet her, very interesting. What happens to her story, her family, very cool. Socks for me stole the show. Socks was the little cat. Socks was hilarious. There were many moments in this where I just love the bit where like he has a tranquilizer dart, and Buzz like, "What was that made? Was that for me? If I get out of line?" He's like, "I've give you 5 minutes." And there's many moments in this, or it just made me laugh. And Socks stole the show. Like, I would happily watch a movie just on that cat. And I'm not even a cat person. I prefer dogs, but Socks really stole the show. I loved it. Fantastic. Um, but yeah, like there's many characters, but apart from like, even though they're all pretty good, none of them really stood out apart from Socks, the elderly sort of Hawthorne, and Buzz Lightyear, and the rest for me just felt like just they were just there. You know what I mean? I don't remember any of their names. None of them really did anything to make me go, "Oh, they're interesting. I like them." They just felt like fella characters. Kind of reminded me of like, I liked The Incredibles 2. The Incredibles 2 was a movie that I kind of wanted, but then I watched and I was like, I don't need it. But you know, I liked it for what it was and what it did. Halfway through that movie, you have a section of characters, other superheroes, and they're there, but and they have interesting powers, but none of them really do anything. They're just kind of fodder. They're background characters just to fill in space, you know. And then by the end, they turn evil because of like the whole thing happened in the story, and then you see a bit more of their powers, and then they get the goggles knocked off of them, and then that's it. They don't really do anything. They have like small 15 to 20-second sort of moments each, and that's it. And that's how it felt with these background characters, is that they're just in the way. They're just there, you know. So in terms of characters, the only ones that really stood out was Hawthorne, Socks, and Buzz. Obviously, Buzz stood out. As I mentioned, I as I always do whenever I do any sort of review, I always write down my notes, and I put in like in brackets Chris plus Tim. As I mentioned, there was a lot of hate about the whole Tim Allen thing. But again, as I mentioned, I always try to go into reviews and I try to not judge it. So I'm sitting there watching the movie, and at first, all I could hear was Captain America. If I closed my eyes, all I could hear was Captain America being Captain America. Because especially when he was doing his inner monologue and he was talking to himself and he was doing very technical language, I could just hear Steve Rogers, Captain America, right? Um, and then there were moments in it where you meant to what's the word I'm looking for? Emotionally connect to Buzz. You're meant to uh, feel whatever he's feeling. I just couldn't, because I'm so used to hearing Tim Allen's voice talking to Woody in those sort of moments, that whenever whenever Chris, whenever not Chris, but whenever the script asked Chris to be very somber and very sort of connecting, I just couldn't connect. So there were moments where you did have disconnect, and there were moments where I felt like, yeah, that's Buzz, and then moments like that's not Buzz, And they did a lot of sort of catchphrases, It's like they did. Oh, you're mocking me, aren't you? They did that one. They did blast whenever something would go wrong. You go blast. We did it to infinity and beyond, and there were loads of other like really sort of Buzz catchphrases that they used, but I get it. It's meant to be the movie that inspired the toy. I get it. But at the same stage, it's the fact of it was just cringy because it just didn't work. Like, those words don't work unless it's Tim Allen, unless it's his voice. So basically, what I'm trying to get at is the fact of I understand the hate. Like, I could happily watch this movie and listen to, Chris's voice and it'd be fine. But there are moments where Chris's voice works and there's moments where it doesn't, and it's the moments that don't are the reason why I don't get connected to Buzz, why I don't get the drama, why I don't care for him. I should care about Buzz Lightyear because, for God's sakes, Toy Story. I grew up with Toy Story. I had Buzz Lightyear toys. I had Boy Pajama pajamas. I had, I love Buzz Lightyear. I have T-shirts with Buzz Lightyear on. I grew up with Buzz. Buzz and Woody was like my friends. I was part of the Roundup gang. I should be so emotionally absorbed into this movie, but I can't because the voice doesn't fit. You know what I mean? And that's the issue. Now I've seen the movie. I understand the ridicule. I understand the hate, and I do agree. Like, if this movie was done with Tim Allen's voice, I think it would have done worked a lot more. Because even though the character of Buzz doesn't look like the Buzz that we know, because this is done a lot more sort of high graphics, realistic wise, that's fine. That's completely fine. There's no issue with that. It's just if it was Tim Allen's voice, you know what I mean? It should have been Tim. I don't want to drill into that. Like, I don't want to go too far into it because we've already spent too much time on that and there's other things to talk about. But yeah, in terms of characters, it just for me it just didn't work, sadly. And it was mainly because of the voice. But again, that's what I feel. As for the story, the beginning was solid. It quickly lost me around the middle. Like I said, around the 40 to 45 minute stage, I'm starting to lose me. I tried my best to stay away from spoilers. Um, I will get into spoiler territory near the end when I talk about the twist, but that won't be for a while, and I will warn you when that comes up. But as for the story, no spoilers. But there are things in this movie that was great. Was high fantasy, was high sci-fi. But I feel like it will lose a lot of people. It will lose a lot of the fan base because a lot of people are going to be watching this, right? Are going to be kids, so it's going to for somebody like me who likes fantasy, who likes science, who gets all this high this idea of time travel, and the faster you go in light speed, the more time is like the faster you go, the slower you age, and everything else ages normally. Um, all those sort of sci-fi concepts. I'm used to those sort of things. I've read high fantasy, books like Hyperion and Dune and stuff like that, and I'm used to that kind of stuff. But for the kids, they're gonna watch that and be like, "Oh, look, pretty colors. Oh, look, Buzz is in a spaceship going around the sun. That's cool." So I get what they were trying to go for. It just doesn't work, and a lot of that high fantasy just it even lost me. It will lose a lot of the audience, and it lost me near to the end because it started to not make sense. Like, there was so many questions near the end. I was like, hold on, where did that come from? How did that happen? I get what you're saying, but that don't make sense because you've given me such a high concept of fantasy. Okay, so I'm on board with the concept of what you're trying to show, but then again, this sort of brings in with the whole twist part. But you've shown it me, and I get how it works, but you haven't shown me how it works within the story, within the narrative. And because you haven't showed me in the narrative, you've lost me. Because it doesn't matter how much I understand what you've already told me, because it doesn't has nothing to do with the narrative. I don't understand what's going on right now, and I've got more questions than answers. You know what I mean? Hopefully you know what I mean. I feel like I've confused myself, let alone anybody else listening. Um, but I just feel that in terms of story, the beginning, as this would have worked as a short story. Even better, to be honest, this would have worked if it wasn't a Buzz Lightyear movie. If you took the Buzz Lightyear name and character off it, and you made like Ranger, like Space Ranger Rick, or um, Astro Blasto or something like that. Some sci-fi spacey name, right? You took the whole Toy Story Buzz Lightyear thing off it, and you just made Pixar try the hand at making a fantasy, a sci-fi epic, space opera sort of film. This would have worked, because then we wouldn't be attached to the whole Tim Allen and Chris Evans thing. We wouldn't be attached to the whole how does it link in with Toy Story, or even the fact of this doesn't feel like the Buzz that we know. This doesn't feel like what Buzz would do or how Buzz would act. You know what I mean? So you wouldn't have that issue. All that issue wouldn't exist. So it would just, all you'd have would be people going to the cinema completely new, completely fresh, and experiencing it for what it is. And it can still be confusing. It can still use high fantasy sort of stuff. Just the narrative wouldn't have been as much affected if they hadn't had put the whole Buzz Lightyear on top of it. And I feel like that's the issue with this movie, is the fact of it was a Buzz Lightyear movie, but didn't feel like it should have been a Buzz Lightyear film. You know, I think that's the issue for me anyway, and maybe that might be the issue for everybody else. So that's the story. As I mentioned, good for the beginning, loses you around the middle, and by the end, you've got more questions than answers, really. Um, One of the key standouts for me this whole movie is the visuals. Now, I'm a big fan of Pixar. I'm a big fan of animation. From the early days of animation to now, I just love looking at the progression of how animation has really sort of become somewhat quote unquote real, really. And Pixar are at the forefront in that. Pixar are always doing something different. Their movies have a style, but they always look different. You have the realisticness of Wall-E, then you have like the je ne sais quoi of the French, Paris, Paris, the beautifulness of Paris in Ratatouille. It still has Pixar, but it's still very sort of very very different, and it's very beautiful. So I wasn't surprised when I watched this movie. Now how every single frame can be paused and just framed into a picture. Seriously, there were so many moments in this movie where I'm sitting there a gawk, like I've got my mouth open like a codfish, just watching it, being like, "That's incredible. That is beautiful. That could be that I can freeze frame this and pull it into a frame and put it on my wall. That looks gorgeous." The explosions, the creatures, the planets, the space travel. When Buzz goes around the sun multiple times, and you can see how detailed the sun is. The sun looks so accurately, scientifically accurate. I'm just blown away, and this whole movie is just like shot after shot after shot. Oh, wow, wow, wow! That's beautiful. That's beautiful. That's beautiful. It's just a shame that the narrative and everything else lets it down, because this movie is gorgeous. Visually, this movie's stunning. And I'm not surprised, again, because it's Pixar. Pixar know what they're doing. Like, I go back to Toy Story 4. When I went to the cinema to watch Toy Story 4, I was blown away by the rain. At the beginning of that movie, there's a whole sequence where it's raining, like really pouring down with rain. And the water looks realistic. The rain looks realistic. I'm like, oh my god, this looks gorgeous. And there's one section in Toy Story 4 that blew me out of the way, which looks so real. I had to sit. I still don't believe it's animated. There's a section where they're in the charity shop. I think it's like a charity shop sort of thing, and there's a cat, and the cat comes in, and there's a spotlight, and the cat walks into the spotlight, and it just starts to bend, as cats do. It starts to stretch, and you can see the little flecks of dust, kind of like in real life. If you went into that sort of place, it'd be incredibly dusty. You can see the little flecks of dust. Each one of them has its own sort of light particle. So some of them are emitting light, some are not emitting light. Some are not reflecting it. I mean, and the cat just looks so realistic, and I was blown away. I was like, "Oh my god, that cat looks real. That cat's not animated. That cat is real." Obviously, it was animated, but it just looks so good. So every time Pixar makes a movie, they always blow it out of the water of how good something just looks. Even when it's really really cartoony, it just looks good. It looks good. You want to devour it. You want to eat it because it looks so delicious on screen. It's like porn. It's fantastic. Visual porn, that is, anyway, not real porn. But you know what I mean? Like it just looks so nice. You just want to keep looking. You know what I mean? And that's this whole movie. And I feel like that's such a shame of this film is it looks so gorgeous, but everything else just lets it down. You're like ah. You know what I mean? It's a roller coaster. It's a roller coaster of emotion. You know, some moments you go, oh, that's beautiful. Oh, wow, I'm about to go over the hill, and this is the best ride ever. And then you're like, ah, and then the story comes in. You're like, I'm so deflated. You know, I watched it with my mum, and I looked over at my mum and said, what do you think of that? She goes, yeah, it was all right, but I wouldn't watch it again. And that's how I feel about this film is the fact of everything, like, it's beautiful, but I don't feel like I need to watch it again. This is a one and done sort of film of like, yeah, it was all right, but yeah, I don't need to watch it again, you know? Um, Now for the twist, I'm going to get into a bit of spoiler territory. So I will talk about spoilers about about the story a bit and about the twist. So if you don't want to hear about any of these things, then by all means jump ship and go. For those of you who are jumping ship who are not staying, overall my final sort of thoughts on this on well my overall score for the film, shall I say, is a 6 out of 10. It's it's better than what people said, in my opinion. I think it was a better movie than what people gave it credit for. But seeing it one time is all you need. You only need to see this movie once, and then that's it. You don't need to see this movie again. So that's for the people still who are about to leave. Those of you who are going to stick around for the twist, I'm going to count down to three. Then once I get down to three, I'm going to spoil the ending. And yeah, like I said, I'm going to spoil the ending. So I'm going to count down to three. So give me enough warning. So 1, 2, 3. Okay, so there is a big twist at the end of this movie. Well, I say it's a big twist. It's not a big twist. The original twist from Toy Story 2 was better than the twist in this, right? At the end of this, it turns out that Zurg's in this movie, that Zurg is Buzz from the future. And this is where it starts to lose me. This is where the whole point with you have the high concepts, but none of it makes sense, is the fact of Buzz basically there's a moment in the movie where he comes back and his friend Hawthorne has died, has passed away, and that the new governor's in. He's like, okay, so basically, thank you for trying to find a way off this planet, but you spent like 60 or so years doing it. Um, it's got like that's it. You know, we've got to call it quits. We're just going to put a shield up around the base, and we're just going to live here. We're just going to survive here. And it's like okay, that's fine. But Buzz is like, I want to finish the mission. He's having nightmares, so he goes out. He steals the ship. He gets his new formula because Socks basically finds out how to make this new sort of crystal that makes him go to hyperspeed, so that he can come back. So he goes off, and again, this is where it gets a bit confusing. So the Buzz that we see gets in the ship, goes around the planet, crashes back onto the planet, comes back. It finds out he's been gone 21 years, because a lot of time travel in this movie, and finds that things are different, that robots have now taken over, and that people are trapped inside of the dome. And there's this guy called Zurg, and that's it, right? And you go for the movie, and you eventually get to Zurg's ship, and you find Zurg, and it turns out that Zurg is Buzz. And it turns out he's an older Buzz, a very, very, very old Buzz, and that the Buzz that we knew, who went round the planet. Again, this is going to get confusing. If I do lose you, it's not my fault. This is just the movie, right? So then the Buzz that we know, who we saw go round the sun and come back into hyperspeed, another Buzz, but it's the same Buzz, went round the planet, but found him when he came back. He was attacked, and he was tried to get court-martialed for stealing property. So instead, he basically fled and went as far into the future as he could. He got into the future, found an alien ship. I guess it's alien. It could be human. I don't really know. Again, the film doesn't explain anything. The film doesn't explain of how he found the ship, who the ship belongs to, why the ship's there, any of that, why the ship's abandoned. Like I would imagine that when he went round the sun and he came back, he went as far into the future as possible, that ship was a human ship, was a ship from the colony that was on the planet. Why was it abandoned though? I don't know, but for some reason he went as far as he can into the future, found this ship, found the the Zerg sort of robot armor that he wears, and then uses the ship and what's left of the crystal to go as far back into the past as he can, to right his wrongs, to complete the mission. But again, if you're confused, so am I. And it's not my fault. I'm not the one explaining this. This is generally how this movie is. And this is why it's so confusing, because you've given such a high concept of time travel and the whole idea that, time travel is possible. The idea behind it is, if I went into space and I went to, say, like Jupiter, and I was going the speed of light, right? I would age however long it took me to get to the Jupiter and back, right? But the time it took me to get from there and back would be more on Earth than it would in space, because time is different in space. So, say for example, it doesn't. But say for example, it took me 8 years to get from Earth to Jupiter, right? So I got 8 years to get to. That's a round trip. 8 years, Earth to Jupiter, right? In those 8 years, I've only aged 8 years, right? But Earth has aged a lot more. I don't know the math, how much more the Earth has aged, but there's a lot more years have passed on Earth than it has for me traveling those 8 years, right? That's the idea and concept that they're trying to show. The problem is, when you start bringing in future Buzz, and he's somehow a reality of Buzz that we've been with for the whole movie, isn't the Buzz that was somehow came back to Earth and went to the future and became Zerg. None of that makes sense. Again, this is where, for me, it lost me before this, but I would assume that's where it lost a lot of people. And this is where it gets a lot convoluted and it makes no sense. And the whole sort of structure and science and all the sci-fi shit you're trying to set up just falls to pieces, and it just becomes a shambles. And by the end of the movie, you're like, I don't know what's happening. I don't care for any, because none of this makes sense, you know. Um, like, they even made a joke, and it really annoyed me. Like, I laughed, but it annoyed me, because Zerg Buzz is trying to fight Zerg when they first meet, and Zerg goes, who, like, Buzz goes, who are you? And Zerg goes, you know who I am. And then Buzz stands there, looks at him a bit quizzical, and goes, father? And then sort of Zerg laughs, and it opens up, and he goes, haha, not quite. It's me. I'm you from the future. And you can tell that the look on Buzz's face, where Buzz is confused. Like, this none of this makes sense. Like, how can you be me from the future? I haven't gone to the future yet. And that's when the future Buzz starts to explain to our Buzz, how it happened. You can still see in Buzz's face, like, yeah, none of this makes sense. Like, I know it happened, but none of this made sense. And even the future Buzz is like, I don't understand how this happened. So even the characters, even in the movie, don't understand how or why any of this happened. You know what I mean? And this just shows me that Pixar, or the writers, wrote themselves into a corner and then tried their best to write themselves out of it. But it just didn't work, because they had all this high fantasy and, I mean, high sci-fi sort of epic space opera sort of technical babble, but they didn't know how to write themselves out of it. You know, what they could have done, which probably would have been more interesting, in my opinion, is they kept the whole, because as we know, Toy Story 2, because again, this whole sort of plot hole that they've done makes no sense to the canon that's in Toy Story 2 that we already know. Because in Toy Story 2, Buzz finally meets Zurg, and Buzz goes, no, you killed my father. And then Zurg goes, no, Buzz, I am your father. And then Buzz goes, no, like a Star Wars sort of like reference. And that's canon, that's what it should be. So why not play on that? Why not have the fact of, Buzz got lost on it? Because what happens in the story is that I'm going to give you a quick sort of breakdown of this movie, so you don't have to watch it, right? Or if you've already have watched it. Basically, they're in hibernation in their ship. They get an announcement that they found a habitable world, so they land. Space Rangers are sent out. Buzz and Hawthorne are sent out with the Rookie, and basically they go out and they find out the planet's hostile. They try to escape, but while they're trying to escape, Buzz accidentally crashes the ship. And then his whole sort of thing is try to finish the mission, try to find a fuel source that can power the ship so they can leave the colony. And that's why he keeps going around going around the sun and coming back hyperspeed, and that's why every time he does it, 4 years pass, and he does it and does it and does it, and eventually Hawthorne dies, and he spends like 61 or so years doing it. He's only aged a few minutes over an hour, if anything, and when he finally comes back, his best friend, his best friend's died. The new commander doesn't want to send any people. He's just happy to, we tried for 61 years. It's time to call it quits, which again makes sense, really. Because for Buzz, it's only been a few minutes to an hour. But to everybody else, it's been a lifetime, you know? So you can understand where they're coming from and be like, come on, we've tried. It's time to call it quits. We're stuck here, but it's fine. We have ways to protect ourselves, and we'll just start a new life here. And Buzz, like, no, we've got to finish the mission. So he steals the ship, goes into the future, blah, blah, blah. And that's where it gets a bit confusing. What could have fixed this film, in my opinion, like, this is just off the top of my head. I haven't wrote this down. This is generally off the top of my creative brain, right? Buzz obviously lands on the planet, crashes it, stuck there, right? Space Command back on Earth or wherever gets notification that they haven't heard off the ship for ages, right? This is the last known coordinates, okay? So they don't have the technology to get back to them at the moment. The last technology they had to do it left with Buzz and his team, so they don't have the tech to get it. So it's going to take the 61 years to catch up with Buzz, to not just build the technology, but to fly there, right? So they flew there. Buzz's dad is part of the space. He's an older sort of space ranger. He's leading the team, and then he kind of gets there, and he's Zurg, right? He basically becomes evil. He gets there, finds that his son's not there, finds that they try to court-martial his son for stealing the ship. Again, this is all top of my head. Like, generally, this is just it, right? And for some unknown reason, Buzz's dad basically, turns evil, goes, you know what, you tried to prosecute my son. My son, all he tried to do was save your lives. His best friend's gone, and you try to court-martial him and arrest him for that. I can't be having that, and basically goes rogue. Then Buzz comes back 21 years later, for him only a few minutes, but 21 years later, finds Zurg, finds the robots, tries to figure out what happened, meets, Zurg finally, and Zurg's happy because it's his dad. He's like, oh, I found you, son, finally. Buzz is like, who are you? I don't know who you are. Suit opens up. It's me. I'm your father. And he's like, Dad? And he's like, why have you gone evil? And then you have that whole emotional dynamic where, like, he has to try and stop his father because his father wants to go back in time and help Buzz save the day. Basically, we have the crystal. Let's go back in time and I'll make sure that none of this ever happens. You can go back and finish the mission and you won't get stranded on your planet, and I won't have to turn evil and all this jazz. We can start afresh, and I don't know, you know what I mean? Like, I'm just throwing shit at the wall and seeing what sticks. But already I'm thinking I would rather watch that movie than the movie that we got, And then you can have a huge moment where, like, Buzz is like, no, Dad, I can't do it. I'm not. My friend had a life. My friend had a kid, had family, found a love life. I can't take that away from them and all the other people who had lives. I can't finish the mission. I won't let you do it. And then they have that big argument. They have a big fight, and he has to defeat his dad. It's really heartfelt, and that's it. And then the story's end, and then you have that moment where like, Buzz has changed as a person, as a character. He had to fight his dad. He had to save the day. He finally finished his mission. Bingo, bango, job done. Roll credits. $1 billion at the box office. I don't know. I'm just spitballing here, but me not being somebody from Disney, just being somebody who reads a lot of books, who loves sci-fi, who's sticking to the canon, right, and who occasionally writes books and stories every now and then. I'm not a professional. I'm a freelance sort of guy, and I've managed to think, I would say I wrote a pretty decent story. I would keep the beginning as it is, and I would factor in my own ending that I just made up there on the spot. And I thought, like, that would have been a more interesting film because it keeps with canon, right? It keeps the whole, Zurg being his dad. Yes, it's not a surprise for us, for the audience, but it's still very much of, oh, it is his dad, sort of thing. And instead of trying to twist it, be like, oh, well, I'm going to subvert expectations. It's not really his dad. It's him. Like, what? No. Fuck off. Go away. Kill yourself. Makes no sense. Go away. So I'm generally sitting there like I've just made up a better story, a better ending to this movie, you know, and I didn't even try. That took me all about a couple minutes, not even that, you know. So I don't know what was wrong with the writers' room. I think they tried to subvert expectations. They tried to go too far in with these high concepts, and they just wrote themselves into a corner. In all fairness, but yeah, that's it. That's Lightyear. That's that. My final thoughts on the movie, as I mentioned before I did the spoilers, is that I wouldn't watch it again. I've seen it once. That's enough for me. One and done. I can happily move on with my life. This movie really shouldn't have been made. It didn't need to be made. Like this movie again would have worked if it hadn't. It had nothing to do with Buzz Lightyear. If it had nothing to do with Buzz, this movie would have made a bit more sense and would have worked a bit more. And I don't think they would have wrote themselves into a corner because they don't have to stick and subvert expectations because what we already know from the Buzz character and what we already know from Toy Story 2 with the whole Zurg and Buzz sort of revelation of I'm your father. Don't have to worry about any of that. Go in fresh, go in clean, tell your sci-fi epic and just have fun. Because they did, you can tell with the visuals, they were having fun with the visuals. This is a stunning movie, but everything else just falls flat, and that's it. Really, and that's why I said like this is why I couldn't get emotional because I just by the end I was so caught up in trying to figure out how everything makes sense that it made no sense. You know, like for example, I go back to the whole Zerg ship. If when Buzz comes back like what goes as forward in time as possible and finds this ship, I would imagine that when he finds Zerg's ship, and because you know Buzz himself can get inside of the suit and the suit fits perfectly for a quote unquote human body, human physique, then you know I have to ask the question of like, okay, so in this far distant future, wherever Buzz turns up, um, that the humans that were stuck on this planet eventually built this ship and built the robots and all that and built this power armor sort of stuff. But again, I ask the question, why are they not using it? Why is the ship derelict? You know what I mean? Um, and these again, this is just the issue with this whole thing. None of it makes sense. You haven't explained none of it. You've just done it in a flashback and be like, oh, well, I did it in a flashback, so it's okay. Like, no, it's not. Even if the whole point of a flashback is to fill in the gaps of the story that we haven't seen, that we wasn't present for. That's our point of a flashback, and not be like, oh, this happened, but we're not gonna explain it, but it happened. No, that's not what. It's not how it works. And for me, this is where the movie fell flat. So my final rating out of 10 is a 6. As I mentioned, I've watched it once. I don't need to watch it again. I do think it's better than what people gave it hate for. But that being said, I do agree with a lot of the hate, and I do understand why a lot of people didn't like it. And yeah, that's it. That's all I got to say about this movie. So let's go to the end, shall we? Let's get this over and done with. And here we are, finally at the end. So yeah, that was Lightyear. As you can tell, I wasn't really impressed. Like I wanted to love this movie. I really, really did. You know, I loved the trailers, and I loved when it announced. I was like, oh my god, this is incredible. But yeah, it was a whole bleh. You know. But that's what I think. What do you think? By all means, please let me know your thoughts and opinions on Twitter at the Nerdstalgic. No, the Nerdstalgic _pod on Twitter, or just type in the Nerdstalgic podcast and you should find me there. Also, you can listen to this and all other episodes of the podcast on Spotify. You can also find me on Anchor, Google Podcasts, and Amazon Music Podcast. Also, which is I'm really, really proud of. Currently, you can find the show on YouTube. So if you go onto YouTube and type in the Nerdstalgic podcast, you'll find me there. Just look for my flaming face. Currently, I'm at 42 subscribers. I'm hoping by the end of the year I can get up to 45. So if you're listening and you have a YouTube, by all means, please subscribe and like and all that jazz. It really helps out. I really, really appreciate it. If you're listening to this on Spotify, don't forget to give me a rating. That helps a lot, and I really appreciate that as well. If you go into my profile on Spotify, underneath there is a star. If you click on the stars, that will give you an option between 5 stars and 1 star. 5 stars being the best thing you've heard in your life, and 1 star's Vogon's doing poetry, absolute trash. You know what I mean? The absolute garbage and all that crap, right? So whatever you feel like is fair, 1 to 5, whatever you feel like is helpful, please do give a rating, because it helps me and I appreciate it greatly. And once again, before we end, I just want to thank you to Order Books for sponsoring the show and sponsoring the episode. Again, if you're interested in anything that they do, video games, vinyl, secondhand books, anything like that, you can check out Walder Books by going to their website, www.walderbooks.com. Also, once you get there, when you get to checkout, you type in the promotional code NERDY10. That's NERDY 10, all higher case, at checkout, and you get to save yourself 10% off whatever you order. So, now that's all done, without further ado, it's time to end. So, as always, thank you for listening to the Nerdstalgic podcast. As always, I appreciate it deeply. If you are a returning listener, I appreciate you so much. If you're a new listener, welcome and thank you. And yeah, so thank you for listening to the show, and I will catch you in the next one. All right, guys, bye-bye.